Released on November 20th, 2007 in North America, Rock Band takes the guitar and bass gameplay from Guitar Hero 2 and adds two new instruments, vocals and drums, for a full band experience. For a little background, Harmonix developed the first two Guitar Hero games, but when it came time to develop the third game, Harmonix was bought out by MTV Networks. Harmonix didn't want to create another full Guitar Hero game. However, they were obligated by their contract with Activision to make a third game, so they released Guitar Hero Rock the 80s in 2007 and spent most of their resources on Rock Band 1. This new series introduced more than just the new instruments to play, so without further stalling, let's give Rock Band 1 a closer look. Rock Band 1's main attraction is the new instruments and band gameplay. Although I've already talked about the guitar, vocals, and drums gameplay in previous videos about Guitar Hero, I'm going to go over them again in case anybody watching this video didn't see the other ones, or just needs a recap. The guitar and bass are practically identical in gameplay. Hold down the notes and strum them as they cross the strike line. Hot bows are notes that don't need to be strummed, they can be tapped. Players can also hit hot bows with the lower neck buttons on the Rock Band guitars. There's also a switch on the Rock Band guitars that can be moved to change the sound filter that plays whenever players activate Overdrive, which is this game's version of Star Power, which, if anybody doesn't know, will give players more points per note and can be used to save the player if they're failing a song. Anyways, the only thing that separates the bass and guitar gameplay is the bass groove, which allows bass players to go beyond the 4x multiplier to a 6x multiplier. It raises the stakes a bit. Let's talk about the drums next. They're also pretty simple to play. Hit the drum pads as the notes cross the strike line. The drum pads represent the different parts of a drum kit. Red is the snare, yellow is the hi-hat, and also the high tom, blue is the crash cymbal and medium tom, and green is the ride cymbal and floor tom. Some songs flip red and yellow so that red is the hi-hat and yellow is the snare to make certain patterns easier to hit. Most notably, songs with a lot of 16th hi-hat notes. There's also a kicker that sits on the floor and acts as a kick pedal that hits the bass drum on a real drum kit. Whenever the player sees a thin orange line on the highway, they step on the kicker to hit the note. Last but not least, the vocals. Players try to match the notes the vocalist sings in the song to score points. There's also spoken notes, which are lyrics that don't have a pitch attached to them. For example, if a metal singer were to scream, that would be a spoken note. These notes don't need to be sung, as there's no way an average person would be able to replicate those notes, so all they have to do is make sure the mic picks up sound while the note passes by. Anyways, vocal notes are organized into phrases, and players must hit a percentage of notes in order to get an awesome rating, which will grant a boost to the multiplier and the most points possible. A circle on top of the vocals HUD represents the percentage of how close the player comes to matching the vocal notes in a phrase. The filled up circle grants an awesome rating. If the player doesn't fully match the vocalist notes, they'll get other ratings such as OK and messy, which obviously don't give a lot of points. During instrumental sections of the song, the player will sometimes run into percussion sections where they'll have to tap the mic to the rhythm of the song to hit the notes and score. They can alternatively hit the accept button on the controller to hit these notes. I also wanted to mention, whenever the player activates Overdrive while playing vocals, Overdrive will only be used when vocal phrases are flying by or if there's a percussion section, so the player never wastes their Overdrive. Some songs have long instrumental sections without any singing, so a shorter version of the song will play if the player is doing solo vocals to not waste their time. If the player somehow forgets how to play any of these instruments, there's tutorials for each one of them. Now, let's talk about the band gameplay. In band gameplay, 2 to 4 players try their best to contribute as many points as possible to the overall score and performance with their chosen instruments. If a player is to fail, a red bar will start to slowly drop to the bottom of the performance bar, and another player must activate Overdrive to save that person. A player is allowed to be saved 2 times before they're down and out, and after that, failure is pretty much inevitable. Another aspect of band gameplay is the unison bonus, where if all players play a small section perfectly, they'll all get 2 bars of Overdrive. Speaking of Overdrive, Whenever a player is activated during band gameplay, it applies a multiplier to every instrument rather than just the instrument that activated it. In certain songs, what is known as a big rock ending will present itself, and when it does, players go crazy with their instruments and play whatever the hell they like until they hit a few notes at the very end. If they successfully hit all of the charted notes at the end, they'll be granted some extra points depending on how hard in the paint they went. In this game, players are rewarded with 5 golden stars whenever they get enough points in a song by utilizing as much overdrive as they can get, and of course, performing really well, instead of just hitting every single note in the song like Guitar Hero 2. I think that's about it for the general gameplay. Let's move on to the tour mode, starting with the solo tours. Solo tours is very similar to the story mode of Guitar Hero 1, where players must pass 5 songs that constitute as a venue, and there's a total of 8 story mode campaigns, not including the bonus or DLC venues. There's no encores like from Guitar Hero 2, rather the player just simply goes to the next venue after beating the 5th song. Anyways, players earn money whenever they pass songs in the tour modes, and they can use these to buy new clothing and instruments for their custom character, which we'll get into later. Past the story venues, players can unlock bonus songs by playing the bonus tour setlist, and can play DLC songs with one of their custom characters in the DLC venue. Now, let's move on to the band tour. In band tour, multiple players are given the choice to play certain songs they've unlocked in the solo tours, along with DLC songs they bought. Once the band gets enough stars or fans, they'll get a challenge which consists of a few randomly chosen songs, and once it's passed, players will unlock more songs and venues to play with. Every so often, players will get the opportunity to engage in a challenge, such as 5-star every song in the setlist in order to obtain more fans and money to up the ante. There's sub-venues within each level, and they contain all kinds of songs from the Rock Band setlist, and playlists where players can choose which unlocked songs they want to play, but there's also random song playlists, and playlists that have a certain theme to them, like songs from a certain decade or a certain genre. It's really fun if you can get 3 other friends to join in. There's just something about the progression and touring around as a band that really brings people together, and it's just so fun. Once the players are through with all the challenges, they'll get access to the infamous Endless Setlist, which is a playlist consisting of all the songs from Rock Band 1, and players will have to sit through the whole thing if they want to pass it. They can pause the game, but they can't turn off their console or leave the challenge. Apart from the band gameplay is the competitive modes, Tug of War and Score Duel. In Tug of War, 2 players play certain sections of a song and try to completely fill the bar on top of the screen to their side so they can win. It's a better version of face-off mode if you ask me. Then you got Score Duel, which is just classic pro face-off, where 2 players play a song the entire way through, and whoever has the highest score wins. Okay, that's enough about the multiplayer. Let's talk about quick play. What can I say about quick play that hasn't already been said? Players pick a song and a difficulty, and bang, they're playing that song. Truly revolutionary. And with that, I think I said all that needed to be said about the gameplay section of Rock Band. I honestly can't think of anything else. Rock Band released in 2007, so a fairly early game for the PS3 and Xbox 360. It also released for the Wii and PS2, but we'll get into that later. Anyways, the visuals of Rock Band are alright, it definitely has its charm, the venues are cool enough, and players can really get attached to their custom characters with the various amount of options. The animations are fairly clunky though, they can seem weird at times, almost like the characters are a little too flexible. I want to get this out of the way right now. The gameplay you're watching is misleading. I actually played this game on RPCS3, a PS3 emulator, and I upscaled the game to 1440p and uncapped the frame rate, so that the animations would run at 60 FPS. Authentic PS3 Rock Band runs at 720p, 60 FPS, although the animations are 30 FPS. So if you want to see how it would look on a PS3, here you go. Wow, now it really feels like 2007 again. Gotta love technology for breathing new life into these games. Anyways, back to the art style. Rock Band has a fairly realistic style. The characters look human, the venues aren't anything that crazy, and the instruments aren't too far-fetched. Of course, Rock Band needed some cool things in order to spark it up, so things like the special instruments are a nice fit. Speaking of the instruments, let's talk about the Creator Rocker. One of Rock Band's other attractions was the Custom Character Creator, where players choose a template for their character, and they can make some modifications like their physique, attitude, which will determine which animations their characters will use during gameplay, and a few clothing options. Once players get enough money, they can spice up their characters by buying the cool apparel in their rock shop and giving their characters new instruments. Players can apply tattoos/art on their characters and instruments with pre-designed artwork created by the Harmonix staff to give the characters some edge, or make a joke out of them by stretching a silly tattoo over their entire face. Speaking of characters, during the loading screens, players can sometimes see the things their character is doing before the next show. The game will also sometimes do a freeze frame on the characters during band gameplay before a song starts. Now, onto the venues. For a game that has an art style not too far from reality, Harmonix did a good job making unique and cool venues. The lighting is fine for most venues, the centerpieces and talking points are interesting and give character to the stage, and there's a good amount of detail. I would talk about every single one of them like all my other videos, but honestly, there's like over 20 venues and that sounds exhausting. Guitar Hero World Tour had 18 venues, and I think my venue analysis got repetitive, so don't ask me how I make an analysis on over 20 venues interesting. Instead, I'll just mention some of my favorite venues. Stockholm Syndrome. A small inside venue with cool x-rays of people that rocked out a little too hard and messy wires above the band. Orion Lounge. A cool nightclub positioned on the top floor of a tall building. Look out the huge window behind the band for a beautiful view of the city of Amsterdam. Alice's Free Love Cafe. A cozy cafe that gives off good vibes. Can't get more intimate than a local coffee spot in a big city. Bibliothèque Morte. An underground venue that feels like a cemetery or ritual place of some sort with the skeletons and bones all over the venue. Despite its disturbing look, it's got a lot of energy and fun to it. Club Westbrot. A club that models itself after a creepy forest with its twisted trees and lights behind the decor that look like the eyes of stalking wendigos. Wilshire Forum. A huge stage with a boatload of speakers. In the background, fans can be seen holding signs supporting the band, and the band's name is in big bold letters on the wall of speakers. The Rockabana. Yet another big stage that separates itself from the rest, with the lights that cover this stage that react to the music playing. The venues that stick out are pretty cool, and their unique details really make them special. However, I feel like some of the venues kind of blend together. I actually got some venue names confused when I was writing the script due to some of them looking kind of similar. Anyways, let's move on to the menus. The menus in this game are pretty simple. They're similar to Guitar Hero 1 and 2. A concert plays in the background of the main menu screen. The player is given 4 options on the career screen, and the setlists are presented as a long sheet of paper with song titles imprinted on them to give the illusion it's a band setlist that will be played. The main menu has 6 buttons that will expand to show more options to make sure players get where they want to be. Now, onto the new instrument UI. The instrument UI is obviously close to Guitar Hero's, but it has some changes to keep it fresh and separate itself from the series. The multiplier bar is below the strike line, along with the overdrive meter. The notes are represented by rectangles instead of circles. The instruments have simple icons on the performance bar. The vocal notes are green rectangles with the words sitting on the bottom of the vocals UI. A new bar in the top right displays how much stars the player or band has attained so far. Hoppos are smaller versions of the notes, and the vocalists can modify their options during gameplay by pressing certain buttons. I guess I should have mentioned this during the beginning of this section, but I'm a bit scatterbrained. Anyways, the new UI looks really good. A lot of character, personality, fluidity, it's not distracting, and it looks sleek and classy. What else could I ask for? And with all that being said, I think that's about it for the visuals. The soundtrack for Rock Band is very solid. Every song fits with the game, and most are fun to play for any instrument. The game has a variety of genres, decades, and band styles to ensure the solo tour doesn't get stale, and that every song feels like a different experience. There's the more popular artists, and some obscure bands, so players can vibe with songs they already know, and jam out to new artists they might like. Apart from the main tour songs, there's the aforementioned bonus song setlist that the player can unlock. They also fit in well with the game's setlist, and have the same vibe that the bonus songs for Guitar Hero 1 and 2 had. My only grievance is I wish there was more heavier types of metal in this game. I can understand why they strayed away from those kinds of metal songs, as the vocals for these songs would have been pretty boring, as they no doubt would have been entirely spoken notes. But adding a few of those kinds of songs I think would have added some spice to the guitar and drums gameplay. Anyways, each song has a crowd track within the audio file, which is a recording of harmonics and plays singing along to certain sections of the chosen song. It's supposed to add immersion to the game, to make it seem like the audience in the game is singing along, but I personally never liked it that much, but to each their own. Before I end this section, I want to talk about the sound effects. They're fine for the most part. They're a combination of guitar and bass chords, along with some drum notes that activate whenever the player accepts or declines an option. Other than that, I don't have anything else to say about the setlist for Rock Band, or its sound effects. Rock Band has a community tab, which was used for people to look at leaderboards and other people's stats. Of course, these are all offline, but there are some bonus videos in the community tab that show some of the behind the scenes of making Rock Band 1, and that's about it for the extras in this game. Before we go on to the issues, I want to touch on the PS2 and Wii versions of this game. The PS2 and Wii versions have everything the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions have, but instead of players being able to create and use custom characters, the background venue is a pre-recorded video while the highways of the instruments are overlaid on top. I can understand why they did this for the PS2, but it's weird that they did this for the Wii. Of course, the Wii wasn't going to look as good as the next-gen consoles, but it definitely had the power to have real-time animations, considering later Rock Band games had the ability to use custom characters and real-time animations for the Wii. The Wii didn't have online gameplay or DLC either, which is also odd because, again, later games had these features. Instead of DLC, both versions had track packs, which included 20 songs that were already featured as DLC on the PS3 and Xbox 360. Just thought I'd mention that. Anyways, let's move on to the issues. Hyperspeed. Why is it not here? This game only has one track speed, and if that's not enough, that's too bad. As someone who uses hyperspeed in every Guitar Hero that has it, having to deal with the track speed can be painful. It wouldn't be so bad if Guitar Hero 2 didn't have this feature, so they purposely removed it, and they could have included it in a patch, and they didn't do that either. It's not so bad with the guitar and bass. This game's difficulty is in between Guitar Hero 1 and 2, but with drums, this track speed drives me crazy. It can be so hard understanding when to hit notes, and during fast sections, it can be very difficult knowing if some notes are two different notes or a chord. Alrighty, let's talk about the spoken notes. The spoken notes don't work great in this game. Theoretically, all the player has to do is make sure the mic picks up sound whenever spoken notes pass by, but for some reason, some spoken notes don't fill out the vocals bar as much as they should in order to get an awesome rating. Take Sabotage by the Beastie Boys. This song on vocals is nothing but unpitched lyrics, so the player should be able to sing whatever they want and get a perfect score, but since this is Rock Band 1, most of the time players will get a 3-star rating because the spoken lyrics don't work as intended. Next, we have the drum fills. Drum fills are small sections that pop up during the drums gameplay whenever the player has overdrive, where they can hit any notes they want without being penalized. Then, if they hit the green button at the end of the fill, they'll activate overdrive. It's not a terrible way to activate overdrive, but also not a great way to do it. Oftentimes, it messes up the rhythm of the drums, and if there's one thing drum players need, it's rhythm. One more thing, the song filtering system isn't too bad if the player only has the base game set list, or just a few DLC songs, but if a player has a lot of DLC, it can take minutes just to get to the song the player wants to choose. Other than that, I can't think of any other issues this game has.
You're keeping in step in the line.
Rock Band 1 is a great first step into the full band formula that will continue in future Rock Bands and even future Guitar Hero games. Players can master 4 instruments, or just casually play vocals while their experienced friends jam their hearts out. Solo Tour offers a straightforward story mode, while the Band Tour offers a very fun, team-building mode that'll bring friends together and create unforgettable moments. Let's count up everything Rock Band has to offer. 2 new instruments that add more variety to the gameplay and invites 2 more people to play. Plenty of realistic but cool venues that keep the game's visuals fresh and new. Tons of custom character options with many clothing and instrument options. Online play for anybody that doesn't have any friends but wants to play with the band. Solo tours that have a main set list, a bonus set list, and a set list for DLC songs. A band tour mode that's rewarding and challenging, and especially fun with 3 other people playing. A soundtrack that has a good mix of genres, song decades, famous, and more obscure songs, and many features from Guitar Hero 1 and 2. Rock Band 1 has a few issues that are hard to overlook, but they don't put a huge dent into the game's quality. It's still a fun game regardless. And until next time, invite some friends over and start a band.